If you don't want to hear about politics, this channel isn't going to be for you. There are plenty of non-politic discussing metal channels out there, and feel free to watch them to your heart's content. Indeed, my channel's existence doesn't negate all the channels of guys talking metal releases or deep dives into subgenres. It's mainly just another branch of metal discussion, albeit in a rather focused topic area. It's pretty clear that this channel is a combination of metal, the musical genre and subculture, and a critical analysis of the politics therein from a leftist perspective. This isn't a commonality on YouTube. In fact, it's something lots of left leaning metal fans, myself included, have wanted for quite some time. However, I'm under no illusions as to how unwanted this kind of channel is for lots of people, including lots of metalheads who make it abundantly clear their disdain not only for leftist politics, but the concept of politics in general. I get this. No one wants to have shit they don't like shoved down their throats. And further, some people don't like intellectual mumbo jumbo. Fair enough. This notion, conversely, applies to the aforementioned leftist metalheads who have spent decades sifting through countless metal channels who simultaneously preach about how annoying politics is while spouting their own politics, of which most often comes in the form of reactionary, right-wing, or radical centrist sentiment, in various degrees of bluntness and extremity, just as the more conservative metalhead doesn't want woke shit thrown into their face. A leftist metalhead doesn't want some spectacled motor mouth or chinless car dweller blasted into their eardrums. This is mainly why the concept of echo chambers is so pointless to soapbox from. Of course, no one wants to hear some shit they don't want to hear. The difference being, on metal YouTube and in Western society in general, by far the most common political sentiment being cultivated and spread is reactionary and right-wing. Yes, that includes the liberal media and its never-ending supply of alley-oop epic takedown material being provided for the vast network of aforementioned explicitly right-wing media. Watch my video on the establishment if you're still unconvinced of the predominance of conservatism in our media and think some rage bait Twitter screenshot is proof of rampant wokeness. Anti-capitalist and revolutionary ideology is either shoved into the same outgroup of dumb donkey Democrats or fellow naughty political extremist fascists, and is therefore quite rare to find, particularly on metal YouTube, which is why I made this channel. Okay, now that I have my origin story out of the way, I want to briefly discuss our misconceptions and faulty assumptions of metal culture and fandom we leftists have, and set some things straight. If you're not a leftist, thanks for making it this far without commenting how much soy sauce I guzzle, and how Jewish I supposedly am. I'm in no way denying the political character, the impact metal can have upon revolutionary movements, or its historical associations with socially aware subjects and individuals. What I'm mainly going to discuss is the sometimes expressed opinion of the opposite, where metal's association with reactionary, traditional, and otherwise conservative viewpoints is denied, and metal's legacy is artificially cleaned up in a way. This, in my opinion, takes away from any real analysis of metal, and makes it easy for a more conservative metal fan to discount anything we have to say when they hear you proclaim how metal will never be this or that. What I think is important to realize is that metal itself, even at its most revolutionary and radical, is primarily music for people to bang their head to. Lots of metal musicians themselves are primarily just musicians. And even if anti-capitalist or socially conscious sentiment is expressed, for the vast majority, it comes in the form of a, man, this shit is fucked up, and kind of ends there. Genres we generally associate with being politically conscious and revolutionary, like punk, have similar dynamics themselves. The music itself is, at its most authentic, just some music. Metal in particular has no shortage of examples of just some dumb dudes. Additionally, and I'll speak more of this later, but the strict labeling of someone or something as this or that political category is dismissive of, especially in Americans, the absolute convoluted mess, ideologically speaking, present in most people. You see it all the time, for example in Luigi here, where we try so hard to box someone into an ideological category and identity that, most of the time, just doesn't fit the clean-cut demarcations that would make discussions like these so much simpler. The dude committed arguably the most revolutionary anti-capitalist act of this decade, but probably couldn't tell you how many volumes of Das Kapital there are. We're complex human beings, not only influenced by the dominant ruling ideology, but our own individual life experiences, and that is extremely prevalent in metal, with ideologically mixed bags thrown together, desires to return to pagan chicken farms with electric overdrive musical machines, proclamations of freedom and liberation with authority worship and bootlegging. Neoliberalism is a fucking mess. Again, I'll speak more of this later. I'll start off with some focus on the mind of the reactionary metal fan, as I, at one point, was one myself. First off, it's fairly common to think most metalheads don't care about politics. In a video made by Hate Meditations on the politics of metal, he discussed a large category of metalheads categorized as the traditional or common sense type. You know, the back when metal was for real men, and only the music matters, only metal, etc. These people are a great example of ingrained cultural hegemony and display obvious aversions to any discrepancy from this hegemony. It's obvious when we see common sense dudes lambast wokies or people forcing politics into everything, while simultaneously expressing their own politics, of which generally reaffirm the cultural norms and expectations of Western society. Politics is more than an every 4-year thing. It encompasses everything that impacts society in one way or another and the conflicting interests therein. It's common sense we need to drink water or eat food to survive, right? How is the limited resource of water procured and distributed? How is food cultivated? To whom does what go and how much? This process, the following results and the conflict therein, is politics, and it cannot be realistically avoided by sticking fingers in ears. In fact, hiding under mounds of consumptive goods is a political expression itself by virtue of the productive process of said goods, the availability to procure those goods, and the ideological or philosophical desire to consume or not to consume this thing over that thing, and the ideological and philosophical reasonings as to why the aforementioned consumption is preferable to an in-depth discussion of political conflict. Therefore, the desire to retain normalcy, a harkening back to the good old days, or contempt of conflicting interests to this perceived normalcy, is a very political act, insofar as it preassumes one interest as normal and another as a threat to that normalcy. Loving your country and being a patriot is normal? Is this normalcy applicable to the millions of corpses strewn about in the name of the nation in the form of natives, slaves, workers, the poor, and the most marginalized populations? Or perhaps to the millions without a roof over their head and no food in their stomach? Or perhaps those going overseas to express their patriotism only to die or get cast on the street after fulfilling their duty? Those slaughtered in the name of this patriotism are demonized and forgotten to history as the enemies of our great country, as were the civil rights protesters, the American striking workers, abolitionists, and all the way back to the Whiskey Rebellion. No mention is made of the conflicting interests at play in any criticism of American foreign policy and its disastrous effects, nor of what it truly means to be a patriot, aside from jerking off to the Revolutionary War section of an elementary school history textbook. Is patriotism limited to blind celebration of soldiers and apple pie? Or can it be an acknowledgement of the twisted priorities and ridiculous preoccupations being forced upon us by a ruling group that will work its populace to death and contort its proclamations of morality to suit their own financial interests, the well-being of its citizens be damned? The dangerous threat to a unilateral normalcy and its expression as common sense is as much a political act of war for the business owners under attack from strikers as the comfy reactionary gamer forced to look at a woman on his crusty monitor. The only politics one cares deeply about is their politics, of which, for the reactionary status quo defender, comes in the form of combating any attempt at exposing the status quo as primarily a perpetuation of the interests of capital, whether done consciously or subconsciously. The most privileged by society will be the ones defending its preservation the most, regardless of why its preservation is so detrimental to the multitude of the less fortunate. I can go on and on about dumb shit conservatives say and do, especially within metal circles, but that's not what this video is about. What is this video about anyway? We as leftist metalheads have some fundamental faulty conceptions about metal itself and what it signifies amongst metal listeners. I'll start off by admitting I was someone who typically fell in line with that aforementioned category of metal fan, the traditional common sense fan. I grew up listening to my conservative dad's metal, classics like Dio, Iron Maiden, Metallica, as well as bands like Stryper, Wasp, and Manowar, all of which were viewed as, simply put, the greatest, most manly, and supreme music ever, a belief that to us was just common sense. It's commonplace to hear reactionary metal fans reduce leftists in metal to newbies to the genre, or just posers who only listen to Slipknot or metalcore, etc. I definitely shared this opinion in my youth. I saw a meme saying how gay that shit was and was like, alright, guess I'll avoid that like the plague, cause, not gay. To this day, I've barely listened to any metalcore, can't name 2 Slipknot songs, and haven't even touched Limp Bizkit, and generally my taste is still influenced by this reactionary legacy of mine. I discussed it in my masculinity video, but we attach our metalness to our masculinity, and equate the most metal qualities with the most manly qualities. This helps to keep us men stay in line with traditional notions of masculinity and perpetuates the same old misogyny and bigotry needed to make it in our ruthless capitalistic society. At the same time, if you're just getting into metal, it's probably not a good idea to question a neo-fascist black metal fan's metal acumen. Sometimes well-intentioned, young, left-leaning metal fans just shoot themselves in the foot attempting to out-metal some freak who literally eats shits and breathes the most depraved and obscure metal you've ever fucking heard. I moved on to become a Dave Mustaine fanatic and Rust in Peace disciple, something that came pretty easily due to Dave's alignment with the normalcy of the traditional common sense fan. Megadeth was the greatest, most manly, and supreme music ever, and Dave was the best, cause damn, he just said it how it was, and was a champion of common sense. At this time, I had no problem blaming SJWs, liberals, and homos for all my problems, and trying to censor my free speech. I mean, just look at this video, and this libtard's outraged face. It's just common sense to hate these idiots. At the same time, I thought that people can do what they want, as long as they don't shove it in my face. And whether I understood it or not, I had empathy with those who were unfairly treated, bullied, or picked on by especially the more popular or higher status people, as I wasn't very popular and I feared being bullied myself for liking weird music, and thus experienced a certain level of ostracization and alienation. But this didn't make me shy away from the pride I had in my supreme Megadeth, resulting in a kind of reactionary victimhood. It's important to understand that no matter how ridiculous a reactionary metal fan is, even the most esoteric and mystical, were kids at some point, and, if into metal at a young age, most likely were ostracized and alienated themselves, developing a similar reactionary victimhood that is rooted in an empathy of the marginalized. But like so many other marginalized groups in ruthless, hierarchical society, direct their hate and outrage towards those even more marginalized. We see this empathy utilized in many positive ways, such as the powerful rallying potential, camaraderie, and brotherhood present in metal, as well as in negative ways, such as a desire to remain exclusive and afraid of contamination. This social analysis is just one of the many contradictions in the metal subculture, the embracing of nerd shit and crazy stuff, while adhering to a conservative association with metal as a whole. Metal's embodiment of societal contradictions is precisely why there's so much dissonance amongst metal fans when prompted into a deeper analysis of it, and is why it remains such a fascinating sociological topic and subculture to analyze. as well as a notoriously difficult one to definitively pin down.
I think metal is best understood, this kind of its polarity between lack and excess is a fundamental ideological constant for it to manifest. It's basically it gives you the paradoxical form that metal takes in its most kind of crude symbolic matter. You have an enormous excess that is sacred, that is itself defiled and indicating a lack. If you understand me, we have an overproduction of volume, of meaning, we have an overproduction of affect, of transgression, and all of this is indicating towards something, towards an absence. We are all pointing back towards something which is not there. And at the same time, yes, we treat the excess literally as sacred. We already do in metal. You ever go to a metal concert and you hear people talking about the band afterwards, people occasionally talk about having near religious experiences, especially if you go to black metal or drone metal where the sound is pretty constant. So you already have a sacred dimension in there, and some metal fans will be very happy to kind of run with this self-mythologization, and some metal fans prefer to play it cooler, effectively, and like the politics thing, will say, oh, metal's not a religion, metal's just music. But on the other hand, if it was just music, you wouldn't wear black every day, would you? The sacred excess is at the heart of this kind of ideological bulwark. We need to understand that metal is at once luxurious and ascetic. It is gluttonous and starving simultaneously. I've said it repeatedly, but the ambiguity that goes in metal runs right to its core. It is totally reminiscent of a line that Zizek uses when he describes the real, which the real is defined as a point of the immediate coincidence of the opposite poles. Each pole passes immediately into its own opposite. Each is already in itself its own opposite. It is not. This is not a kind of yin-yang where one contains a piece of the other. There is a constant tension, or like a magnetic polarity shifting, where the two are constantly inside the other. The excess and lack, for instance, in metal culture, it's an unceasing borderline. I would say dialectic is wrong, because it's not a synthesis. You reach a tension that never dissipates.
Contradiction is a massive component of all our psychological makeups due to the hyper-contradictory society we exist in and attempt to rationalize. The traditional common-sense metal fan will attempt to avoid this analysis in order to avoid the sheer contradiction present and the discomfort that comes as a result of this necessary introspection. When things are reducible to a cut-and-dry common sense, where a manichaeistic universe is concocted to rationalize the incoherent bigotry so essential to their own comfort, it's understandable why a thing they enjoy, such as metal, is utilized to exemplify the good or common sense portion of that universe. Metal thus understandably becomes an escape from the head-on confrontation necessary to combat these contradictions, and is viewed as a bastion to resist the social justice invasion so detrimental to this mental fortress of comfort. We see similar dynamics at play with video games, television and movies, and entertainment in general, and it comes back to what I mentioned before about those most benefited by the normalcy of the status quo being the most outraged at any subversion or countering of that comfortable normalcy. The woke is most terrifying to those enjoying a comfortable slumber. Amongst leftists, this explanation of the reaction to wokeness is fairly well understood. So why do I bring it up? Because metal is in many ways something to distract and to be consumed, and the consumption itself is by a majority white, heterosexual men, it's important to not consider metal as a solely transgressive and revolutionary medium of expression. Metal can and has been used to perpetuate societal norms and bigotry, and it can and has been used to distract consumers into endless cycles of consumption and numbness. What leftist metal listeners must do, and I'm paraphrasing from David Burke, is actively propose these necessary discussions concerning contradiction, transgression, and revolution from the capitalist norm, as opposed to simply proclaiming an inherent nature of metal to be revolutionary. We can discuss the ideological history of metal and its musicological evolution, but I'll save that for another day. This ties into a major point from my last video concerning hair metal. It's commonplace to hear left-leaning metal fans assert that a genre of makeup, big hair, and tight leather pants is inherently subversive of conservatism. But, in actuality, this expression is but a particular generation's attempt at asserting their own traditionally masculine dominance and adherence to the status quo. Similarly, subgenres like nu metal and industrial metal have their own histories of perpetuated bigotry and misogyny that cannot simply be ignored. We cannot just uncritically assume a generality upon certain supposedly clean subgenres, just as we cannot with the supposedly problematic ones like black metal. Black metal itself has its own overtly revolutionary and radical leftist branches, and I will never deny their existence as authentic black metal, mainly due to black metal's proclivity to channel the extreme fringes of humanity in any number of forms. However, this does not deny its extensive roots in escapism and occultism, and continued attachment to various occult fascists in tandem with neo-Nazis and white supremacy. This attachment is undeniable, and is a key exemplar of reaction to intense societal contradictions, taking form in extreme nihilism, pessimism, and an obsession with past glorious times, a denial of the neoliberal present, and a desire to go back or accelerate ahead into a future glorious age reminiscent of the past. Either way, it's based on a reaction to the present, and in some ways the reaction is understandable, especially for anyone who finds enjoyment in the profoundness of black metal. Existentialism, fantastical escapes, or quests for inner truth are all done by the same people that were at one point children, and the reaction to an undesirable present can come in many forms. My point here is that if we are aiming to truly be critical in a dialectical, materialist manner, we cannot fall victim to similar generalizations and denials that exemplify the ridiculousness of reactionary sentiment itself. We cannot claim that metalheads are nice and they just buy stuffed animals all the time, when any one of us has a plethora of examples of asshole or bigoted metalheads. We can't claim that metal is anti-establishment if the establishment itself uses metal to serve its interests, and especially when the term establishment mainly serves as an obscurantist and nebulous role in critical political discussion, much like free speech and censorship. Attempting to force moral supremacy onto metal is ignorant of the societal forces that shape metal, and is partly why I don't really like a couple things I say in my first video in regards to metal's political and moral character. Developing political consciousness and revolutionary sentiment in metal requires an understanding of the present reality and political landscape, and any action taken towards change cannot be preceded by claims to a non-existent present. The conservative reaction itself has various forms, especially in our capitalistic society, where you can have any number of different flavors of status quo bootlicking to choose from. And your fundamentalist grandparents not liking the metal you listen to does not end the discussion of conservatism and metal there and then. I am in no way excusing the reactionary far-right sentiment in metal. We just have to critically understand the reasons for it if we have any desire to change that. Now concerning labeling. All the talk of leftists and conservatives and reactionaries, etc., although applicable in a broad sense of political discussion like this, is generally limiting in any discussion with other real people, and other metalheads especially. Some guy doesn't care if you call him a neo-fash paleo-libcon. He just likes it when guitar makes sound, and drum boom. Even then, someone who clearly has reactionary tendencies, or labels themselves as a conservative, usually have at least a couple sentiments or opinions counter to that self-labeling. For example, like I mentioned before, lots of metalheads who experienced ostracization in their youth have some feelings of empathy for the marginalized, or, quite frequently, we see anti-capitalist sentiment in the form of opposition to big business or sellouts. you won't really see myself attach a super specific label other than just like general leftists because of similar reasons. After all, for us Americans, ideologically, depending on who you're talking to, you can potentially put a vast swath of labels onto anyone. And that just doesn't really matter when we're truly attempting to break some bread with some guy who said something questionable. I'm not saying everyone needs to be some grand mediator, but I personally think these genuine discussions are important for a lot of people who otherwise could be left to the whirlwind of reaction awaiting them. And besides, I get plenty of labels forced upon me anyway, mainly a Jew. Also, this isn't a call out to anyone in particular, and I say this in the nicest way possible, but here on Metal YouTube, there's a lot of dumb people. I'm not questioning metalness here. In fact, sometimes I feel the stupidity is a badge of honor for you guys, but Jesus Christ. Pretty much every single fairly large metal YouTuber has at least like a one or two videos about politics. And like 98% of them are the same exact fucking bullshit with the same exact key politics words recycled, like my grandma calling in to Fox News. It's like, yeah, I just feel like, free speech, blah, 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 censorship, blah, blah, woke, Republicans and Democrats, as well as copious amounts of do whatever you want, but don't shove it in my face. Anyway, here's all the reasons why I hate fucking woke. This shit is essentially as if like a cooking YouTuber just started talking about Enter Sandman by Slipknot is my favorite death metal album, rock and roll, fellas. Seriously, stay in your lane, some of you. God damn, it's insane to hear some of the shit you guys spew. And then they have the nerve to call me stupid. The lack of critical thinking skills as well is a mind-boggling. Your critical thinking muscle is so underworked, you get a pump when you have to choose between tater tots or fries. It's so underworked, your max is, was that just a fart or something more solid? I've been a metalhead basically all my life, but I'll still admit I don't know as much as someone like Wyatt X Him. Just saying.